We're going to look at Thomas Jefferson and how his writing on the Declaration of Independence can be examined from a literary standpoint. So when you read Thomas Jefferson, you know that he was chosen for writing the Declaration of Independence precisely because of his writing skills. So if we look at his background that he offers to us in the text, think about how his account of the ratification process sort of builds the narrative of our identity. So who was at the Continental Congress, which delegates spoke, which delegates had issues, which clauses were taken out. This is all very interesting information as far as how the Declaration was created. So I want you guys to think about the beginning lines of the Declaration, because we often think that it starts with, we hold these truths to be self-evident, but it actually starts with, in the course of human events. So this language is a language of necessity. So it's a language of logic, which is quite interesting when we look at how he calls the laws of nature and nature's God. So these are direct references to Enlightenment concepts of deism. So look at the legal and logical language that he uses and how this transitions later in the text to a more emotional language. Think about also why he had to use legal language in this type of declaration. There's a number of Locke references throughout. I pointed out just a few in the first section because they're all right there. In the first section, we have those certain unalienable rights, so life, liberty, and what he calls the pursuit of happiness, which you know comes directly from Locke, who said life, liberty, and the ownership of property. He also says that to secure the rights, the governments are instituted among men, driving their powers from the consent of the governed. So that is a direct Locke reference. And on the same concept, that the people have a right to alter or abolish it and to institute new government when the government has become destructive to those ends, to the ends of the inalienable rights that the men have. So be aware of how influential Locke is on Jefferson and how much that is the basis of our legal system. Jefferson then moves on to listing King George III's transgressions. So he lays out the individual rights of citizens and then lists in detail the many, many crimes that he's committed against the colonists. If we're looking at language here, note that he uses the informal phrasing of he instead of formal phrasing like His Majesty, which would imply some type of respect to a higher power. He is purposefully suggesting through this language that they are equal. So King George is no higher power than the people. Think of also the specific words that's juxtaposed. So he contrasts things like elected powers against self-assumed powers on page 664. So there's bits of language that you can pull from that you can examine in a literary standpoint to have deeper meaning. If we continue on towards page 665, we see that the language moves from this formal, legal, removed language to much more emotional language. It becomes much more powerful, and this speaks to Jefferson's skill as a writer. So he is speaking directly to the citizens right now because they're going to as it says in the text, they're aware that some people are their British brethren, and so that they're not going to have everybody on their side right away. So he's trying to make this emotional appeal to his citizens. And he talks about these sort of powerful accusations against the basic principles of life. So the principle of maintaining one's life. So he says he, the king, is doing all of these things in order to complete works of death, desolation, and tyranny. And he uses words like cruelty and perfidy, which is a word unique to this text. But he contrasts, you see, barbarous and civilized right there. So think about how he juxtaposes terms and uses wordage that is very, very strong and very, very powerful. And it's purposefully inflammatory. They're trying to get everybody angry because they know this is the beginning of what could be a very serious war. So as he moves to wrap it up, Jefferson combines both logical and emotional appeals. So, for example, on the last page, the 666, he says The logic is a prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. That's a very logical A equals B, so B equals C type progression. But he also brings together the emotional component as well. He says, our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injuries. So we have tried, but we haven't had any success in appealing to your reason. So as he finishes the text, the language is very strong and unapologetic, and it's very, very clear. He says, we therefore believe that we have a right and ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved. So it is very much akin to the final statement of, say, a legal trial, where you have your last statement that you can make. It's straightforward and it's very, very clear because he doesn't want there to be any confusion at this point as to what they're doing. And think about what they are doing. Think about the inevitable death, which definitely awaits anyone who signs this declaration, should they A, not go to war, B, go to war and lose, or C, go to war and get captured, which happened to many colonists. So it's incredibly powerful, and there's a few things I want you to think about as we head out of this one. So I want you to think about how Jefferson embodied particular Enlightenment ideals. So logic and reasonable language, focusing on the individual and inherent human rights, the Locke references throughout, the concepts of oppression and individual freedom. All of these things kind of work together to create this sort of perfect Enlightenment text. So that's it for the Declaration of Independence. I want you guys to go ahead and go back and complete the next step, and let me know if you have questions.